Hello and welcome back to another episode of Seagulls Central. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the podcast. And welcome back after what has been a pretty awful result at the Amex on Saturday. Just one that we've really just got to get our teeth into. It feels like a very similar story to lots of the games we've had in the past over the last couple of years, particularly even against Everton. And a similar story against teams who come to the Amex in the bottom half of the table and just know how to play against us. And we don't seem to ever really have the answers. But yeah, thank you so much to you for coming back and giving me a listen, giving me a watch, getting involved in the channel as always. And if you are here and you haven't subscribed, please do drop a little subscription on the button below. Like the video, get a comment involved. Let me know what you thought of the game against Everton, the defeat. Do you agree or disagree with any of the points that I'm kind of going to try and get stuck into in this next little period? And just let me know how you're feeling after what's been just a pretty tragic result at the Amex. We're just being completely honest. One where Brighton were, if we're going to be completely frank, pretty hopeless at times, without ideas, looked really poor in attacking moments. Looked fine defensively, but, another situation where they just weren't able to break down a low block. They weren't able to break down a team who come to the Amex and put everyone behind the ball. Despite all the attacking players that we brought in, despite all of, 250 million quid's worth of signings in the summer, a squad worth a lot of money on paper with some really bright, attacking, exciting young talents, yet we're not really able to break a team down. And I think for me, the wider context of this whole situation is that this is a problem that Brighton have had for a couple of years now. Totally under De Zerbi. We obviously had it under Potter as well, and we just couldn't score goals and we were making loads of chances. I guess the trouble is with this game against Everton in particular, it's not like we were kind of creating chances left, right, and centre. We finished that game with only one shot on target. And I think, it would have been 14, 15 shots or whatever, but we weren't making loads of chances throughout the game. And I think that's what's quite concerning. We seem to not be able to, play against teams who turn up to the Amex and maybe in a bit of a relegation fight or a mid-table battle and just think, we're going to completely stand off them and we're just going to sit in our own half. Because I think the funny thing about it really is that from the start of the game, I remember looking, and it was probably about 2 minutes in, down in front of the North Stand, and Bart Verbruggen had the ball at his feet, and he was trying to do the old De Zerbi thing of, bringing the opposition onto him and holding onto the ball for ages, and no one was pressing. Literally, no one from Everton was pressing. They weren't coming any closer they weren't coming into their final third, our defensive third, at all. And Bart Verbruggen was just waiting and waiting and waiting. And then he ended up just playing it to Jan-Paul van Hecke. And we played out and he had to carry the ball up the pitch because they were sat so far back. And I think every time that's happened to Brighton at the Amex, we a lot of how we play is relying on being able to play through teams that are potentially quite open. It was certainly something we found under De Zerbi, and it's clearly something that, I remember the club saying that a part of the reason they brought Hurzeler in is because he does say he's slightly influenced by that style of De Zerbi, and it's clearly a style, again, where it favours an open game. Against Man United, it's a team who, they would press us because they're at home, they're on the front foot, they're Man United, and they're going to press us down. But actually, if we play some technical football and are pretty good with it and have dynamic wingers that can get at their fullbacks, we can play through that quite easily with a couple of, clever passes and good play. When you're at home, though, for Brighton, and you've got a team just sat behind the ball, it's a very different ballgame. We have to... They make you play, Everton and other teams who come to the Amex like this. They make you dictate the ball completely. They make you create the chances for yourself. They make you work for every single chance you have, and you don't just rely on the fact that there's loads of space open on a left-hand side or loads of space suddenly open in a midfield due to a poor press or the opposition team being too kind of forward thinking. And I suppose if you're a team like Man City who can break down, you can do that for 90 minutes, but then at the end of it have a De Bruyne or in the past an Aguero or whoever to break these teams down, you probably can do it. But I think with that quality difference, it's very difficult. And I do actually think Brighton have a lot of quality in that attacking third of the pitch. However, for this particular game, I think there were a few tactical and personnel decisions which I think weren't the most appropriate for this game, and we'll get into them. And I think the manager maybe didn't pick the absolute best 11, but I think more broadly, I want to try and get stuck into why this is a problem for Brighton, because it's been one that's happened for a long time. We can't seem to break these teams down. You know, there must be other teams in the world who have opposition teams coming to their ground and just sitting everyone behind the ball. But why can't we break them down? Is it the personnel of players we have? Is it basics thing? Is it a sloppiness thing? I think definitely in the first half, there was a lot of sloppy play. There was a lot of lethargy to our play, a lot of slowness to our play, a real lack of urgency to our play. We had 10 men behind the ball. Everton had 10 men behind the ball at times. But we weren't, in order to try and break that down and open that up, you've got to be quick with the ball. You've got to get the ball in behind. You've got to be fast. You've got to have tempo to your play to move them around and get them unstuck. But actually, we were making it very easy for them, knocking it about on the halfway line a lot. Just lumping balls vaguely in behind, or trying to play it into the midfield and just losing the ball quite easily. And it's quite basic rookie stuff. And I think while we improved in the second half and actually improving our build-up and improving our ability to try and fashion chances, I think that first half was poor. There was such a lack of urgency, such a lethargy, such a turgidness to us, where we couldn't. There was no incision. I think there were a few moments in the first maybe 10 minutes, to be fair, where there were a couple of balls that went in behind to Lamptey on that left-hand side, and he effectively became a left winger. And he was 1v1 up against, their right back. And to be fair to him, he got in a couple of times, and there was one opportunity where he could have crossed it, it was a cross-come shot kind of thing. But that was probably the most that we kind of saw in terms of that real effectiveness, that directness, that ability to do something off the cuff and quick in terms of getting the ball and kind of catching the opposition team off guard, because that was the only time that happened. And you've got to be doing that more in order to break these teams down. It reminded me of Everton at the Amex in 2022, it would have been, and then again in 2023, where, you put them in behind the ball, they get a goal, albeit in most situations, it's like a lucky goal. It's a 50-50 chance. It's something like that where something just goes wrong. It's a penalty. And then they're just able to kind of make the most of it and use that to kind of just sit behind for the rest of the game. And that's what happened in this game. And, it's something that's happened before at the Amex. We've seen it so many times, as I said. I think back to the Southampton game early in the season where they really should have ended up winning it. We obviously got the draw. There's too many to think about. I think of Sheffield United last season, a 1-1 draw. There's literally, it's escaping my mind now, but I could name 10 home games over the last 2 seasons where this has happened. I could probably name 15 home games over the last 2 seasons where this has happened. It's a real issue that we're having. Now, the question I will ask is why? Why is that? Why can't we break them down? Now, I alluded to it earlier. The fact that I don't think there's enough tempo, there's enough of that fastness of play, there's the cutting edge play to kind of open up a team that are really just sat back and move. If the ball's just being passed from left to right, right back, centre back, left back, right back, centre back, centre mid, centre back, left back, right back, like whatever, it's so easy for everyone to just shuffle over to the left, shuffle over to the right. And actually what you need is incisive passing. You need people to be dragged out of positions. You need runners in beyond. You need to have a dynamic play. And now I know I understand that it's difficult to do that when you're up against 10 men behind the ball. I mean, there was a point in the second half where it was literally 6 players in a back line, which is insane, a back 6, and that's not including the goalkeeper. There were so many players back, so I understand how it is difficult at times. But when we've got such a varied attack in terms of the personnel we can bring on, we have fast players, we have dynamic players, you'd think to yourself that it would be that there are ways we can break it down. And I think a lot of the play in and around the box, even in the second half as well, was sloppy, and you can't have sloppy play. The reason that teams like Man City are able to break them down is because they are crisp with every pass. I remember hearing an interview with Kyle Walker back in 2018. It would have been maybe first or second season that Guardiola had won the league. And he said that one of the big things that changed with the Guardiola system, with him coming in, was that so much of it was focused on the basics, which obviously seems so basic. But like making sure every single time you receive the ball, you kill it dead and it's the perfect touch, or it's the perfect touch out of your feet. Every time you pass the ball, you're passing it exactly to your opponent. And that he was saying that was like 70% of the training they did, was to ensure that that was how they play. There was such a focus on the precision to their play, which means that when you're trying to be incisive and when you're trying to open teams up, you don't have that sloppiness that we had in the Everton game, where you're on the edge of the box and you're moving it from left to right, and then you try and play a ball through the middle and you try and do something incisive, but actually it's a bit scuffed and the player's receiving it on the turn and then it bounces off someone's shin and then it's all, and it's all a bit slapdash. And I think that's something we have struggled with in the past, and I think that incisiveness is something we need to try and work out. Can we use wingers more is a question I have as well, because we've got so many good wingers who are fast, who are electric, who can get in behind, who can cause problems. Are we able to kind of use those in a better way? Are we able to kind of make them more incisive in terms of the way we play? Are we able to kind of rely on getting them in behind, can we stretch the play a little bit more? Can we use Mitoma and Minteh, for example, to really pin people high and wide so that the game's stretched, so that we can get players into like the pockets in that kind of half space of the 10? There must be a way to it, because it feels like often we get it out to Mitoma, he then knocks it back to the left back, we get it into the centre mid, he knocks it out to the right winger, he knocks it out to the right back, and we're going around in circles. We get out to Mitoma, he tries to take someone on, and then we cut back, he gets cut out, and that real precision to open things up just doesn't seem to be there. And I think we can go on for hours and hours and hours about how we can break down a low block. If I worked it out, I'd be the Brighton manager and we'd be in the Champions League positions. It's much more difficult than a bloke on a camera just talking about it. Of course, I understand that, but I think this is going to be a real thing that we need to dig into, and it might ultimately need us to change our style of play, because I think in situations like today, when you're seeing the opposition just ultimately not coming onto you, well, what do you do in that situation? But if that's how you rely on beating teams, and they're not coming onto you and they're just going to sit back, you need to have a plan B. And I think that's where having someone like a Gruder on the pitch doesn't make as much sense to me. I love Gruder, very technical, but actually I think from the start we needed a bit more of that electricity in someone like Minteh, who'd obviously had a really good game at Old Trafford, or even a Rutter who has that dynamism, that excitement to take players on. Gruder still at the moment is a player who'll receive the ball on the right wing and knock it back into his right back again, or knock it back into the midfield. He doesn't quite have that confidence to really take players on yet, and that's understandable, to be fair to him. But also maybe that's not his game. Maybe he's more suited to a central position where you can dictate the play a bit more from the middle, and actually just taking players on directly isn't so much of his strength. Now, I do understand that. But it's like, was then not playing him from the start, was then playing for him from the start a mistake? If we'd had someone like Minteh from the start being able to take players on, would that have been a different story? I do think that's a question we need to ask. I looked at that lineup, but I thought, to be fair, that's not bad. I figured maybe Minteh might have been carrying something, and maybe that is the case. But he comes on, and I think ultimately he did look decent. But by that point, when Minteh did come on, when Rutter did come on, it was really kitchen sink time for Everton, and they had 10 men behind the ball instead of maybe in the first half where they might have committed one or two players up, and it was slightly more open, and we could have fashioned something then, like we were able to get Lamptey behind. That had been a Minteh. Could that be different? If that was a Rutter, would that have been different? I think so. I think it's an interesting conversation to have, and ultimately, I don't quite know how we can fix it. But it's one that hurzeler needs to kind of work out. I'm just going to be completely real, and I think we need to get on to the big talking point in the game for me, the penalty. Now, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I do not understand how that is a penalty. I just do not get it, and I'm ready for it. I'm ready for the Everton fans in the comments. Tears, Brighton fan tears, brilliant, all of that stuff. And maybe you'll disagree with me. I think it has split opinion slightly amongst the fan base, with some people trying to be more kind of realistic and so it's not a penalty. But I think for me, look, if it's my team, obviously going, it's a penalty, handball. But I think it's really, really, really harsh. Really harsh. And For me, it's the fact he's been pushed over, Veltman. He's kind of trying to shield the ball. He's got his hands out like that to kind of, just that's the natural movement that you have when you're shielding the ball out. And then he kind of gets pushed or kind of gets tripped or loses his balance from the pressure of the player behind him. It's not a handball, is it? He's not affected the direction that ball was going in. That ball was still going out for the corner or whatever it was, the goal kick. The fact it knocked off his hand as a ricochet when they were battling for the ball, it doesn't make it a penalty. It's not a handball. The game is absolutely gone. And if you watch that replay back again, he gets pushed, he gets kind of knocked over. The idea that if you're the attacking player, you can knock someone into the ball with their hand, I just think it's a joke. And the fact that you can, I was kind of like, okay, this could be a bit hairy. As soon as I watched it back, I thought to myself, flipping heck, that would be so unlucky. And I think if I was an opposition fan, if that was my team, I'd be watching that and going, I really hope we get a ref. It's handball. But deep down, you'd be sort of thinking, oh, it's like, you can understand if they don't give this because that's just such a natural thing to happen. And I think if you're an Everton fan, you've got to be slightly realistic in the sense of, like, obviously you're delighted. And if it were me, I'd be like, it's handball. So I'd be like, deep down, you kind of know that that's a joke. Like, you would know, oh, God, that's like really quite harsh. And actually, if that's the way the game is going, it's kind of, I just don't like that. Like, VAR is ultimately ruining the game in that sense. I'm a big fan of VAR, and ultimately I would want VAR in the game. But when decisions like that are happening, it just feels all a bit wrong. It just, for a game, for Everton, it's great, but for such an important game where 3 points has actually just been decided on that moment, it just feels incredibly harsh. And like, was it blatant enough to be a penalty? Is that a genuine handball? And I think that's where the rules need to be changed. Like, is that what we want to call a handball in the game? Because it didn't affect the direction of the ball, didn't affect the way the ball was being played. No one really got an advantage from it. And it's not like his hand's in a really unnatural position. How's that like an advantage to Brighton by hitting his hand? No, that's not the rules. But you kind of get what I'm saying there. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a joke, and I think if you're a Brighton fan, you've got to be really annoyed about it. However, in the grand scheme of things, neither team deserved to win that. Everton didn't deserve to win it. Brighton didn't deserve to win it. Brighton didn't do enough to deserve to win it. A 0-0 draw would have been perfectly fair. Brighton still would have been very disappointed. I think we'd still be having these same conversations about their failure to kind of create chances and break down a low block. But actually, ultimately, Everton can't really say they deserve to win that because the situations where, they didn't create enough themselves to win it, and the situation where they got themselves ahead, I would argue, you might disagree, was pretty dubious, to say the least, considering the situation around it and what led to him kind of touching the ball with his hand. However, in the grand scheme of things, I think it does open up questions again. Whilst we were all delighted with the Man United performance, I was absolutely waxing lyrical about everyone. And I think Hurzeler has proven a point. I think Hurzeler is capable. This is not a conversation about Hurzeler. I'm more than happy to make this a broader conversation. I do think Brighton still have their deficiencies. They still have their inability to play a different way. They seem to only be able to play effectively one way, where it's open. For example, the game at Everton when we beat them 4-0 on the opening day, Everton came out of the blocks. It's the first game of the season. They were pressing us. I remember it so clearly. They were pressing us, and we played through them. And that's how, Norwich. It's all Man United. These games. Even Ipswich. Ipswich were at home and they wanted to play. And when the game, there were moments in that second half against Ipswich where it was incredibly open. It was so open. And that's how we were able to get a couple of goals, because the game was just so open. And it wasn't today. It was very tight. It was cagey at times. It was poor. The quality was poor at times. And yeah, I also think one thing we need to just quickly mention is the kind of level of time wasting from Everton. And I'm not going to be a whiner about this, but I think we're seeing it increasingly at the Amex. I was talking about it a couple of weeks ago with Veltman. I love it when it's your team, but they did come to the Amex today. They were time wasting. They were doing all the dark arts. They got their goal and they knew how to play. And I think, to be fair to them, to be fair to David Moyes, it's impressive. It's good. I rate it. I back it. But when it's against your team, it's so annoying, because there were moments there where, actually you think to yourself, if we had a bit more time, we could have maybe done something. Although actually in hindsight, I think we probably could have played till 3 a.m. and nothing would have happened. But it's, there was time wasting there. And I always think back to that Aston Villa game a couple of seasons ago. Eddie Martinez, the genius of the time wasting that he showed, but it's incredibly annoying. The only thing I will say actually is at full time, obviously that melee that happened with minteh at the heart of it, I think, and Pickford, and be interesting to see I've not actually been able to watch that back yet. So whether that kind of results in any retrospective kind of disciplinary action, I think that would be interesting. It looked quite heated at times, and I think Asmir Begovic got involved at one point with Verbruggen, and it was all a bit odd. But it seemed, I guess they were just talking about how much of a joke the penalty was, I'm presuming. Or maybe Pickford, in his way that I love him doing it when it's for England, was being a bit of a wind-up, and Minteh kind of reacted, and I would understand that that's incredibly annoying. So, yeah, I mean, and a really, really disappointing result, a poor result for Brighton, a poor game. They played badly. They didn't do enough to win it, and I think it raises questions going forward. Now, Nottingham Forest, who we're facing next weekend, obviously have had a poor result themselves on Saturday, losing 5-0 to Bournemouth, a real questioning kind of performance that they'll be looking at themselves and asking questions of themselves, and it's worrying in that sense in terms of how they're going to respond to it. I'll be there on Saturday 12:30 for that game at the City Ground. It'll be an interesting one to watch, but Brighton need to respond. It's a tricky run now. We've got Nottingham Forest, we've got Chelsea in the Cup, Chelsea at home. It's going to be tough these next couple of weeks, and sometimes I back Brighton more in those bigger games and when they're away from home, and if they're able to kind of play in more open games, I think it could suit them. But it's going to be really tough. Forest, a fantastic side, and it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, the game next Saturday, and we're going to have to bounce back. I think I would like to see Minteh back in the side. I'd like to see Rutter in his starting side. I think Mitoma, obviously Welbeck, I thought had a very good game again. Obviously, you can't really say someone had a very good game in with the kind of quality of performance that we saw generally, but actually I think particularly in that first half you saw that same strength, that same dynamism that we saw in the Man United game. And I think questions probably are more around João Pedro if someone had to be dropped for kind of Minteh coming in or a Rutter coming in. I think maybe you are looking at João Pedro, although I've got to say, but I think some of the attitude that he was showing, the kind of humpiness that he was showing and the slumpiness he was showing, you kind of, do you know what I mean? Like when I'm saying that, like he just shed a bit of a huffiness at times in that game, which I think sometimes is good. You need that kind of arrogance and that annoyedness and that attitude a little bit sometimes for kind of players to get you to over. It's those kind of maverick players sometimes that get you over the line, which we've seen with Pedro. But I didn't like that a little bit. I thought some of his body language was quite poor, and the old waving to the crowd that he does is quite infuriating. But I'm not going to hold that against him. I think an unbelievable player who would on another day would have bailed us out in that game. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we do, because I would like to see Minteh start again, because I think we saw him look so good against Man United, and Rutter obviously probably one of my players of the season this season, so it'd be good to have him back in. But similar old story for Brighton against Everton. We need to learn how to fix that. We need to learn how to break down a low block, and hopefully I've been able to kind of ask some questions around how we can do that. I'd love to know what you think. Is it as simple as kind of being less sloppy, maybe using wingers a bit more? What is it, that incision? Like, how do we get that better? Let me know in the comments below what you think, and if you're at the game, if you're watching it on TV, however you were watching it, let me know your thoughts. How does this compare to other defeats this season? Does this raise questions that maybe had gone away after the Man United and Ipswich and Norwich wins? Had they kind of gone away and now they're back? Let me know what you're thinking, because it's always interesting to kind of touch base with the fan base over kind of where we're at generally. Of course, this season's always going to be a learning curve, and actually looking back on it, the poor supposed run that we had actually probably wasn't too dreadful. We still picked up draws and stuff. So we're in a decent position, but it's about kind of, I was almost hoping we'd be able to kick on and really push into that European kind of positions for the second half. We absolutely still can, but we don't half make it difficult for ourselves, do we, as Brighton fans? It's always a slog. So yeah, but as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. You know how much this means to me. If you've commented, if you've liked, if you've subscribed, even if you've just watched 5 minutes of this video, it really means a lot to me, more than you know. And I really appreciate you getting involved, whether you're listening on audio, whether you're watching it on YouTube. Thank you so much for your support constantly. It's Seagulls Central on Twitter, if you've not found me on there already. And obviously Seagulls Central, Adam MacDonald on YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. It really means a lot. And I will see you maybe midweek. We'll see if there's a talking point. Transfer deadline week kind of approaching, so that'll be interesting to see the final week of the window, what's going to go on, and then the Forest game next Saturday at 12:30. So it's a lot of stuff could potentially happen between now and then. So let's hold our breath. Let's hope that Messi joins Brighton in the next few weeks. That would be brilliant. But thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate you getting involved, and I hope you're not feeling too sad for the rest of your week after this Everton result. I will see you next time, and as always, I'll be Albion.